The next thing that we want to do over here is to create a Dart project over here, because we want to learn a Dart programming language before we can move on with our Flutter development. So let us go and create our first Dart project over here, and for that you can just go to your Visual Studio Code and just hit F1 from your keyboard, and then you can search for the Dart. And when you search for that, it has the option to create a new project. Just select that new project from there, and then we'll just select a simple console application because we are not interested in creating any kind of the UI. So just select the console application, and then we'll just select any location that where you want to set that particular project. So I'll just have a Dart basic, and I'll just select this folder, and now I can give a name for this particular application. So I'll just say as Dart underscore basic, and just hit enter, and that will create a project for us, a Dart project over here. So just go over here and you can see that it has created a project for us, and now we have a Dart underscore basic dot project created, or the file is created for us. And now it has a main function created over here, and if you are not familiar with the function and the method over here, don't worry, we will see it later. But now just remember that it has created us the main function over here, and this main function is the entry point. It is something like, you can see, as whenever you want to enter your building or your house, you have a main gate, right? So just think it as a main gate over here where your program get entry. So whenever we run this particular program, so whenever you run this, it's going to look for this main function, and if it doesn't find a main function, that's not going to run anything. So main function is the entry point. Whenever you run the Dart programming language, it is going to run from this. This is the thing that it's going to look for to get entry inside your application. So this is the thing that it's going to look. So the main function is over here, or the main method is over here. So this is where your Dart programming language get entry. If you are coming from the Java or the Kotlin, you had a similar main function over there where you need a main function, and from there it is an entry point of your application. Similarly, on the Dart, we have a same over here, the main function over here. That is where it is get our function as a, or the application get entry point. Just think it as your gate or something like where you have an entry point. But if you want to see, like if you change this name to a different one, like a mains over here, then you don't have an option to run. So you can see that the Dart is not detecting as any of the entry point, and now you don't have an option to run it. So this is how the Dart detects that whenever you have a main function, then it will detect it as an entry point. So make sure you keep it as it is, and when you run this one, it should print out the hello world for us. So now in the console, you can see, you can go to debug console, and you can see that it has printed us the hello world over here. So this is our first the project that we have created, and we saw the entry point over here, which is a main function, and also we printed out the hello world over here. The next thing that we want to see is how we can create a variable in the Dart. And if you are coming from any other programming language, you may be already familiar with the variables. But if you are not, so let me just give you a brief overview, or let me describe you about the variable. A variable is, you can call it as a container which will hold a value. And like let's say in your house, you may have a container to keep sugar, and you may have a container to keep your salt. So you may have a different container to keep a different things in your house, right? So you can think of the same thing in a variable is something like a container that can hold a value in your computer memory. Or you can also call it as a variable is a name that you give to a memory location where you store the value. So there are different ways to describe a variable, but you can just think it as a variable as a container that can hold or that can store some value. So let us create our first variable over here, and now I'll just call it as a string, and I'll just call it as a first name, and then I'll give a value as a, over here as a Richard. And then you can see that now this first name is a variable, and this first name is our container where we are storing a value of the Richard. So this is a simple variable that we're creating. There are other ways to create a variable in the Dart. Later we'll go and see, but first of all, just remember that this is a simple way how we create our variable, and this is our variable name, which is a variable name is of the first name that has the value of the Richard. So in your house you can see the container for your sugar, and where you're just adding a sugar to that, storing a sugar to that container. So now if I want to get that value, so whenever you want to get the sugar from your container, you have to take it out, right? So we just print out over here, and I'll just print out the first name over here. And now if I just run this, it should print us the Richard over here. So this is our first variable that we have created. Just remember, variable is a container which will hold or which will store the data in your computer memory. And yeah, so I think you got it. And if you are a little familiar with other programming language, then it's really easy for you. And let me try to add a comment over here and just say I'll just say variable name, which is of equals to, I'll just say as a first name, which is our variable name, just to make you understand. And the next thing that we'll learn is over here a data type, a primitive data type in the Dart. So currently we have a little in the string. So string is a data type, right? So it is a data type which can hold only a string value over here. String is like we can always write inside a double quote or a single quote over here, and this is one of the primitive data type in your Dart programming language. So let's say I have to create another like string, and I just say as a last name over here, and which I can give a value of the one, and this is the data type or the primitive data type as a string over here. We can call it as a data type as a string, and it has a variable name of a last name and the value of the day one. And now if I try to change something like last name, which is equals to, I just give out some value over here has a 10, it's not going to accept because it is saying that the value is a type of the int, and you cannot assign a variable with the type of the string. So since our last name is of the type of the string, and since now we are assigning a value to it as a 10, which is a number basically, or an integer what we call it, so it's not going to accept. So this is a type of the string over here, and if you want to store some numbers over here, then we need to create a different type of over here or different data type. So let me take another one as a int over here, and I'll just call it as a age, and I'll just give as a value of the 35. So this is the way of assigning a value to creating an integer which can hold a value of a number or an integer value, right? And similarly, if you want to like I can just say age is of equals to like 10.2, then it's not going to accept it because you can see here that the value type of double, so this is a double type. 10.2 is a double, and it cannot be assigned to a variable type of a int. Okay, so if you have some variable which has a decimal point, then we need to take a different type of a data type. So for that we need to take a double, and I can just say as a weight or something, and that has a value of something you can give as a 60.2. okay, so that is okay. I just need to make it as a small letter over here, not a lowercase, so don't take it as uppercase, that will be a class itself. So we have this, and now if I want to print out over here, and I can just go and print out some of the all of the value over here. So I can print out the last name over here, first name, last name, and I need to print out the age as well as the weight over here. And if I try to run my application again, and you can see I get the Richard, the one, and that particular integer value, age, and the weight. So this is the type of the data that we have currently, the string type, and then we saw the integer type and the double type. And also let us take a look on the another data type over here, which we can call it as a true or false value, like a yes or no type of a value. And for that we will just take a Boolean over here. Boolean means which can hold a either true or a false. So I can just say here age or something. I can take it as age male, so which is equals to true. So now if I go and print out that particular value over here, and I'll just copy this variable name and then paste it over here, and if you try to print out, you can just get it as true. And this Boolean can only hold a value of a true or false. If you try to give something like a number, and if you try to assign like a string over here, so that's not going to work. So it's only going to take a value of a true or the false. So Boolean is the data type that is going to hold only a true or false. It says it's reserved the word true or false denote object that are only instance of this class. So which means that now we have a string type, an integer type, double type, Boolean type, right? And let us also see about the another data type over here that we can call it as a dynamic. And using this dynamic, let's say it's anything, or we can call it as any value, and I can just assign it something like any value over here. And then you can see that this dynamic type can hold any type of the data, whatever we have mentioned, a string, int, double, boolean, right? So any kind of the data type that we have previously mentioned, it can hold. So let's say if I have another data dynamic type over here, and I can just say that any value 2 over here, and I can just give a different value like something like a 10 over here, right? So it's still able to hold that particular value because it's not giving us any error over here, right? And if I say like if I copy this and create another one over here, and let's say a variable of a 3 over here, then I can also give a double value over here. It doesn't make it doesn't give us any error. And also if I copy this and create another one over here, and let's change the variable name as any value 4, and if I set it as true or something over here, then it is able to do it. So the dynamic type data type is kind of a data type that it can hold any value, any kind of the value that we have over here, it can hold it. But make sure that we don't use it more frequently in your application, because the performance will be degraded, right? So I cannot say how much of the performance will be degraded, but it's not a good practice to always use a dynamic value, as it can hold any value. Sometime or in your application you will come up where you absolutely need to use a dynamic because you don't know what kind of value you are getting as a response, or what will be the return type. So at that time we can use a dynamic, but until and unless you are absolutely sure that you don't know what will be the type, then you can use the dynamic type. Otherwise we will have to stick with our primitive type, where it is able to hold a specific kind of the data, right? So that is a good performance to your application, because it knows that it has a data type of the int, boolean, or the double, or the string type. So you don't have to decide like a dynamic type until and unless you really require it. So only take a look on the dynamic when you absolutely need it. Otherwise just go with your default primitive data type. And the next thing that we will also take a look over here is the num type or the number type. So there is another one. If I say it as a num, and I can just call it as any number, and I can just give a value like a 10 dot 20, and it is absolutely fine. And if I also just create another variable with the num over here and call it as any number int, and then I can just create a integer type without any problem, because this num type can hold any type of the int as well as the double. So you can call this a number as this number is as a parent to your int and the double. So this int and the double extends from the num. You can see it is extending from the another class of the num, which we can call it as an inheritance. It is inheriting from this number class. So the abstract class int is extending from our another class, which is of a num. So if you are not ever sure what is an extending or what is an inheritance, so that may be a bit confusing for you, because if you are just getting started with the programming, but don't worry about it. We will see it on our coming up lectures, where we will learn about the inheritance and all of those stuff. But for now, just remember that the integer type is coming from, also extending from the number, which means that num is the parent and this int is a child. So you can see that you have a father as your father, and you inherit some of the properties from your father, because you are the son of your father, and whatever your father holds, then you are also going to get some of the properties that your father have. So just the same kind of a concept over here. We'll see it later more detail when we actually learn about the object-oriented programming. For now, just remember that this int and double is the child of this particular num, so it has some of the properties taken from this num data type over here. So I don't want to confuse you over here. Just understand that num can hold any value of any number type, like a double or the without a double, just an integer value. So these are the basic data type that we need to learn in the Dart programming language. And if you are coming from the Kotlin or the Java, you may be wondering why there is no other data type like the long, right? So there is no other data type over here. We don't have the longs over here, and we just have a int double, which is the number type that we have, and we have a num over here, and we have a boolean and the string and the dynamic. So these are the basic type that we need to learn before to get started. And so just make sure that you understand this number type, dynamic type, boolean type, and double, int, and this string in the Dart programming language. And the next thing that we will go and learn is about the type inference. And if you are coming from other programming language, you may be already familiar, but let me show you what is a type inference in the Kotlin itself. If you are completely beginner, so let's say we just say var, and I'll just say address, and I can just give a value over here as like something like this is my address, right? So now here, if you see, I have assigned as a string over here, but I have make use of a var over here, or a var. And let me also create another one as a var, and let me call it this one as something like let me give another name, something like what I can give over here is let's give as a car, and I can just say as a value of a 10 over here. Now we can see that I have an address, and I also have a car that has a value of an integer, and also this has a string value. And if I want, I can also set it as the double over here, right? So it doesn't have any issue. And also I can just say as a var and say is there, something like that, and I can just say as a false over here. And you can see over here we are using a var, and we are not specifically saying that this is a first type of the string, this is the type of the the double, and this is a type of the boolean over here. And we just make use of a var, and the dot is intelligence enough to know that this is a type of the, you can say as is a string. You can see that this is a string, and if you go over here, if you move your cursor over, you can see that R is a type of the double, and if you move the cursor over here, you can see that this is there is a type of the boolean. That how does it actually know it, right? So we didn't mention that this is a type of an int, and we did not mention this is a type of the boolean. So this is with the help of the type inference. We call it as a type inference, where the programming language is automatically able to find out that what is the type of this particular type that we are using. We are using a string over here, so it can automatically detect that. The compiler is able to process that, okay, so this is a type of the string, and compiler is intelligent enough to know that this is a type of the double, and this is a type of the boolean over here. So the type inference is, with the help of the type inference, you can say that the compiler has the ability to go and check and determine what is the particular data type for this variable, right? So we don't have to specifically mention over here, and the Dart compiler or the Dart compiler can go and check for see what kind of this particular variable is. Is it a type of a boolean? Is it a type of the double? Is it a type of an integer? So it's automatically able to, compiler is automatically able to go and check and determine that what kind of data type is it. So this is a type of inference that we call, and make sure you understand it. And sometimes we just make sure we use a var instead of just a string, or we just say a var age instead of just type of the int age. And you may be thinking about which one should I use, just a var, or just I can statically mention the type of like an int or a double. So you can just statically mention, or depend, or just leave it to the type inference to decide what kind of a data type is it. Depending on your requirement, you can just use it whether a var, or you can directly mention a static type like an int or a double. You can just mention it. But I don't have any good or bad something like a review over here which one to use it. I think you can go for either one. I think it doesn't make any performance issue or something. I haven't come to know about this using a type inference. And but with the dynamic, you need to avoid it as much as possible. But using the type inference, I think the performance there is not a big difference over here. You just explicitly mention over here, or implicitly like with the type inference over here. So depending on your requirement, you can just use it explicitly or implicitly. You can just mention explicitly the type of the that you are for your data type, or you can just make it as implicit and let the type inference decide what is the type for that particular variable. And the next thing that we will see is about the mutable and the unmutable variable. So let's say currently we have this variable as an address, and now I can just assign a different value to this address, and I can just say this this is another address, right? So this is another address over here, and we can see that I can assign the value to this particular address or this variable, address variable, without any issue, right? So this is called a mutable. This variable is by default a mutable, which means that we can change or manipulate the value for this particular address variable over here. But sometimes there may be a condition that you don't want to change the value later time. So once you assign a value and it is not possible to change that particular value, what we call it as a immutable, right? So it is not mutable. We cannot mutate it, or we cannot change it. So how do we create this kind of variable with the dot? So for that, we can just say as a final. We need to use a keyword as a final, and I can just say call it as a PO box or something. Let's say PO box, and then which is of equals to, I can just give as a number or something over here. And then now if I want to change that PO box over here and assign a different value like say 103 over here, then you will get an error over here. So it says that the final variable PO box can only be set once, which means that this is a final variable and then we are not able to change it. So once you assign a value to your final variable, you are not able to change it. This is called a immutable, so you cannot change it. So I hope you got it. And similarly, like you can also do something like over here. Just remove this one, and let's say a final, and sorry, not the first name, final, and I'll just say something like street or the, let's say, city over here, or I'll explicitly mention over here as a the string over here, and I'll just say as a street which is of equal to, let's say, 501, something like this, right? And then we have this particular variable as a string, which is of a type of a string as a final. And now if I change this one to street to something different, it's not able to change it, like a different, like a 50201 street, something like that over here. And you can see that it's not able to change it, that the variable of street can only be set once over here. So these are the way that you can actually mention. You can also mention directly as a type of the int over here. So you don't have, if you want, you can directly mention here as a mention it as a type as an int or the string over here. Or let's just leave it to the type inference where it can be able to decide, the compiler is able to check what is the type of this one, and you can see it's get as a type as the int type. So it's depend on you whether you want to just go ahead and create explicitly mention over here that this is a type of int, final string, final boolean. So all of those you can just set, or just leave it to the type inference that we just learned and let the compiler decide. It depends on you. So just remove this one, and I hope you understand about the final keyword over here, or the immutable variable. And the next thing that we want to see is, like, sometimes you may have something like requirement, create a variable first and assign a value later. So this may be sometime a requirement, and mostly we will create a variable first and assign a value at a later stage. So how we can do that one is, let's say I create some variable as a string, and I'll just say as a zip code over here, and I just create a variable over here. So the variable name is a zip code, and on the later stage I will assign a value to this particular value. So for that, what I can just say is a zip code, and I can just say a value of something like 100. Sorry, I need to assign it as a string. So for that, I just say as 100 or 1000. And now I can just go and print out that particular value over here, and I'll just say as a print as a zip code, right? Print this particular zip code, and I can just go and run my application, and then I can get that particular zip code. So this is creating or declaring your variable at the first, and then assigning a value at a later stage. So now if you try to create this or create a variable at the first, make sure you add it as a type over here. So explicitly mention the type over here. Like if you want to just say, like, say a var, and I can, if you call it something like a city or something, and then you never assign it, and then later you want to assign a city over here, and just call it something like a new city over here. Now you can see that this particular city variable is of the type of the dynamic, right? So now before we mention over here is we explicitly mention this is a type of a string. So whenever we assign it, we get it as a type as a string, which is of a zip code. But here we assign using a create a variable using a var keyword, and when we assign it, we get as a dynamic, not the type of the string. Why? Because it doesn't know at the time of when you are creating this variable, you assign it var, and when you assign it, it's string. So whenever its variable is created, it is created as a dynamic. So we mentioned previously that whenever we use a dynamic, we must be careful. So this is not a good practice. So if you want to create a variable and assign it later, make sure you add a type in front already. So whenever you create a variable, just make sure you assign a variable type. Is it a string, boolean, or double? So you just assign it, and not to make use of the var keyword at this stage. So this is a bad practice. And when you have a var and you want to assign it variable at the same time, that's perfectly fine. That's not going to make a difference over here. But over here it says it is creating a type of a dynamic, right? So we must avoid this kind of situation. So I think that's all for the basic data type about the Dart programming language, and make sure you just go and practice about it. So let me just recap what we just learned. We learned about the main entry point or the main function over here. We also learned about the how to create our variable and how to create a variable name and how to assign a value. And you learn about the variables and its variable name, and then we learn about the type of the data that we have, like a string, int, double, boolean, dynamic, as well as the num. So these are the different kind of the primitive data type that we learn in the Dart programming language, as well as we learn about the declaring or the creating a variable using a var keyword, and also we learn about the how to create a final or a stat of the final variable which doesn't change. When we assign it, you cannot change it. So we learn about the mutable and the immutable variable using a final keyword over here. And also we learn about how to create a variable and assign the value at a later stage. So create your variable at the first and assign a value at a later stage. And also we saw the difference between the implicitly and explicitly mentioning the type whenever you are creating a variable and assigning later, and what is the difference over there. So I hope you learn a basic concept about the Dart programming language over here, and I hope you enjoyed this video. So let's meet up on the next one. Till then, have a great day.